Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Coach Mark Gray-Mendes, one of my old friends from back in the day. He's the head basketball coach at Thomas Jefferson High School and has also just recently joined a new position as the Director of Development and Outreach at the TJ Partnership Fund. Coach, thanks so much for joining me. It's the first time we've obviously kept in touch last couple of years, but it's the first time you've come on since July of 2020, so almost 2 years.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Really enjoyed it the first time around, and you do a tremendous job with these, and I really enjoy following the other ones. So honored and privileged to be back.
For sure. Well, let's go right into it, Coach. The Final Four is upon us on Saturday, maybe the most anticipated Final Four game in the history of college basketball, Duke and UNC. And then the other matchup is Villanova and Kansas. Four blue blood programs are going to be facing off on Saturday. But first, I want to take a broader view of the tournament. I mean, what's kind of your thoughts on how the tournament has played out so far? We've seen, obviously, St. Peter's, the first ever 15 seed to make it all the way to the Elite Eight. We've had teams like Arizona and Baylor and Gonzaga get upset in earlier rounds. So what's been your thoughts on just a crazy tournament? Always seems to be one of the best times of the year as a sports fan.
It's so funny because I think so much of the industry around the tournament has been around the brackets and predicting what's going to happen next. And, everybody on day one, you see everybody on Twitter and Instagram, oh, my bracket's busted and everything's gone. And for me, that was sort of the case, although since everybody else had that happen, I'm still alive to actually win the one that I'm in if Villanova beats Kansas. So everybody cross your fingers on that one. But yeah, it's just, I think the tournament gets better and better and better every year, because the landscape of college basketball keeps getting more competitive every single year. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. People will ask all the time, oh, why are there so many upsets now as opposed to, you might be too young to remember this, but, back when I was your age, you would see it was a big deal if a 13 beat a 4 or if a 12 beat a 5 or something like that. That was a big story and a big shocker. So I think there are a lot of things that comes from. One of them is just there's so much more talent around the game now than there used to be, and it's spread across a larger group of schools. But then additionally, you have the AAU landscape, which I know a lot of your buddies at Marshall played AAU ball when they were growing up, and I coached a number of them too. And the bottom line is these kids get exposure to higher levels of play by being able to participate in that. Nowadays it's the case that high school kids, I would say probably 70 to 80% of high school varsity players in this area play AAU at some point. And those kids get exposed to playing these kids that end up at Villanova or Kansas or Gonzaga or Baylor or whatever. And so when they see them in the NCAA tournament, it's like, oh, I remember seeing these guys at Spooky Nook in that tournament I did junior year or something like that. It's not like it's a completely new experience for them to be playing against these physical athletes that they see at the next level. So I don't know. I think that's a big piece of it. And I think that the way that the 3-point shot has changed the game so much really levels the playing field as well in terms of spacing the floor. The game's not nearly as dominated by size and post players as it used to be. You get hot, then you can make something happen. But, watching St. Peter's and watching Shaheen Holloway didn't take long for him to turn it around and get that job at Seton Hall. But, that was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. My bracket got busted. I mean, I had Arizona winning it all, and they lost in the Sweet 16. And I kind of wanted to ask you about one of the teams, Gonzaga, who I think was the most picked champion. If you look at the brackets, I think 30% of the brackets had Gonzaga winning it all. I mean, what's kind of your thoughts on the criticism that they don't play anyone in their conference in the regular season, then eventually in the tournament they get caught, like last year against Baylor, they lost the national championship against UNC a couple of years ago. They always seem to make it, deep in the tournament, but are never really able to pull it off. We all know Mark Few's one of the best coaches in the country. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's legitimate or just a matter of the tournament? Anything can happen.
I think there's a lot that's just the tournament. I mean, it's really hard to win the NCAA tournament. And it's a lot harder now because of what I talked about earlier with the sort of flattened landscape of teams. It's a lot harder now than it was even, 10 or 15 years ago, I think, to win 6 consecutive games against really legit programs. I take a little bit of issue with the idea that they don't play anybody in the regular season. Obviously, they're not part of a power conference. But when you look at programs like St. Mary's and BYU and San Francisco, and these are programs that have been consistently good year after year after year, that have beaten a lot of these programs in the power conferences. The WAC nowadays, or the West Coast Conference nowadays, looks a lot more like what, say, the Mountain West might have looked like a few years ago. And so, I think that there's a lot to be said for the league that they're playing, they don't come into the tournament every year with 1 loss or 2 losses or 3 losses. So I think people still think of that league as being not nearly as good as it used to be, but it used to be a 1-bid league. And now this year you had Gonzaga as a 1 seed, you had St. Mary's was, I think, a 5, right? And so you put all of that together, and I think that it more has to do with the fact that it's just really, really hard to win the tournament. But they had all the pieces this year. I mean, those 2 bigs in Timmy and Holmgren are just exceptional and really played well off of each other. And then you have Rasir Bolton and Andrew Nemhard, and those guys are just really dynamic guards that are able to control the pace of the game. And so, like I said, I put it way, way more to it's just really hard to win the tournament.
I'm curious, what do you think about Cinderella runs? Because obviously we saw St. Peter's make it all the way to the Elite Eight and lose to North Carolina pretty badly, I might say. But are you of the mind, I'm kind of the mindset, look, I like Cinderella runs until we kind of get to the Elite Eight, Final Four. And then I kind of want to see the good teams play, because then you'll get the good games late. And you saw, again, St. Peter's just got walloped by North Carolina. What's kind of your mindset? Do you love the Cinderella runs to a point, or are you of the mindset, look, I just want to root these guys to bust the brackets and make an improbable run to a championship?
I think it depends on the team you're talking about. When you see somebody like St. Peter's who plays a really fun style of ball, and they clearly are well put together and very well coached. And, I think that you watch a team like that and you think, okay, they might have been a little bit underseeded. Now, coming from the league that they came from, they had 11 losses during the regular season. And if you're like a Power 5 school and you have 11 losses, you're not making the tournament. It's not like they were some juggernaut in their league, but they came together at the right time, and it was really fun to watch them. And when you see a team playing with a lot of confidence, especially in an environment like what they played Kentucky, like I was thinking to myself, oh man, Sheboy is just going to have his way and he's going to dominate them. And that wasn't the way it turned out. And I think as a coach, I like to see a nice mix of, some of these really, really blue blood programs banging it out, but also some of these little guys who have figured out a way to organize their roster and to be able to leverage their players in a specific way. There's a lot to be learned from stuff like that. So to me, I just want to see good basketball. And obviously, North Carolina wasn't a great matchup for St. Peter's. I think Armando Bacot was too much on the inside, and Carolina also had a thing that nobody else had that St. Peter's had played against. They had Brady Manick, who's a guy at the 4 position who can stretch the floor at 6'10", make plays, great passer. So when they went to their run and jump trap or their 2-3 matchup zone, you had a guy who could pick guys out across the floor, skip passes. And so, that was a dimension that Carolina brought that, for example, Purdue couldn't. Purdue had tremendous size with Zach Edey and Travion Williams, but they didn't necessarily have that 4 who could be a playmaker off of those 2 guys. And so I think that's one of the reasons why St. Peter's was able to come away with a win in that situation. And, they were just super fun to watch. So to answer your question, I kind of like a mix of the 2. I just want to see teams that are playing well and with confidence and that look like they're enjoying what they're doing. And there can be no argument. St. Peter's clearly was having a great time, and everybody was having a great time watching them.
That's a great point. Let's, of course, talk about this Final Four. Like I mentioned, 4 blue blood programs, 3 Hall of Fame coaches. Coach K's last run, you've got Jay Wright, who's won 2 national titles in the last 5 years. Bill Self, one of the great coaches at Kansas. Then you got Hubert Davis, a guy who played at North Carolina and was a longtime assistant under Roy Williams in his first season. So you've got a great story there. Coach, I was looking at this Final Four, and I'm thinking it's the best one on paper since 2015. Wisconsin, Kentucky, Duke, Michigan State. Do you agree with that? How excited are you for this Final Four?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that it's going to be phenomenal matchups. I think that Carolina Duke game is going to be the highest rated college. I mean, it might even take out Magic and Larry from '79. Like that is going to be one of the most watched sporting events we've had in a long time. And I think well deserved, because you've got so many storylines that are coming together. I've been a guy who over the years, and I don't think I make any secret of it, the whole Duke thing wore thin on me pretty early in my basketball watching career. Obviously, I have a ton of respect for what they've accomplished and so on, but it's always been my sense that the Duke universe sort of swallows up the college basketball universe a little bit, and it's kind of enough already. So I know you and I both enjoyed watching that ACC championship game with Tech taking them out. But Carolina, they are on a heater right now. I mean, they were playing really poorly at the beginning of the season, and now they seem to have found a formula where, I mean, heck, they were beating Baylor by 25 before that elbow took Manic out of the game and obviously changed the momentum there. And I mean, that's going to be just a phenomenal game between two great programs, and I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of people, oh, Duke and Carolina again, but I don't know. To me, it's going to be just another opportunity to watch two programs that there's a lot of clash there. And so, that should be a lot of fun. I will say, I feel a little bit for Duke folks if it ends up being the case that the last game for Coach K and Cameron, and also the last game of his career, end up both being losses to Carolina. Might not necessarily be the most fun for them. But, I think that other game on the other side is going to be great too. Kansas and Villanova. I mean, Villanova, you feel for Justin Moore, obviously. That was just a horrible thing to see with his Achilles in that last game there. But I think a lot of people expected Houston to really sort of run them out of the gym in a lot of ways. I saw a lot of folks on Twitter that were, oh, Houston's going to beat the hell out of them, whatever. And Villanova just did what they do. It was an ugly game. It was a grinded out game, but Villanova was fundamentally sound. They didn't turn the ball over. They missed shots, but they kept themselves in the game with really solid communication, defensive rotations, and so on. So, that's a program I've always been really impressed with. One of the first clinics I ever saw as a really young coach was I went up to Philly and I got to see Villanova do a clinic in their old gym up there. And Jay Wright was just the most courteous guy. He took 30 minutes or 30 seconds to a minute to just shake my hand, look me in the eye. Thanks for coming. Really glad you're here. Good luck in your season. And not everybody does that, So I'm obviously, that's one of the reasons why I had them going to the final, and I'm hoping to pull for them too. But Kansas, there's a reason they're number one seed. Agbaji is just a tremendous player, and I don't think he's really unlocked what he's able to do in the course of this tournament in the same way that he did during the Big 12 season. The combo of McCormack and Lightfoot on the inside for Kansas is going to be really, really tough for Villanova. I think Kansas has the advantage there, but Villanova is known for really, really strong guard play and making the right play and not making mistakes. And in an environment like this, that's why I picked them to win. So I'm hoping for great basketball. I think it's going to be phenomenal. If you ask me to pick who's gonna win the whole thing, I'd love to see my bracket do well. I think the best shot probably right now maybe goes to Kansas, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be a great couple of games, that's for sure.
Of course, Duke and Carolina also playing for the first time ever in the NCAA tournament.
I know, go figure, right? I mean, you would have thought that would have happened at some point, but
yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, who do you think wins that game? Because you said Kansas will beat Villanova. Who do you think wins between Duke and UNC?
Well, so it's been a week now. I think that if the game had been played on Tuesday, back at the early part of the week, I think I would have said Carolina was in good shape. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see. But I would say, again, I think that you're going to look at that matchup on the inside. I think the guards will pretty much cancel themselves out. Cam Love has been unbelievable to this point in the tournament. And so he might be an X factor if he can keep that hot streak going on. But when you look at the matchup of the bigs, you have Baycott facing off against Mark Williams, and that's just a tremendous clash of styles there. But those two guys, that's going to be really, really fun to watch. And then you have Manic and Banchero, and that's really two different types of players who can attack you in different ways. And where Banchero has really been showing up for me lately is his jump shot's been more consistent. He can take it by, he can go to the rim. He kind of reminds me of like a Blake Griffin type of player sometimes. But now you actually see him start to stretch out to the perimeter. He's knocking down a few 17-footers. I saw him hit a couple of threes in the game in the Elite Eight game. So I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup. I would probably have to give a little bit of an edge to Duke. Just because, I don't know, I think they're a little bit more consistent on the defensive end, but it's going to be a great game, and I will be probably pulling for Carolina because I think there's a better chance that my bracket does better if Carolina wins. So, and also Hubert Davis, Lake Braddock graduate from what I want to say like 88 or something like that. So Hubert Davis actually played games in our gym over at Jefferson. So I'm definitely hoping for that a little bit.
That's an awesome tidbit right there. I'm going Duke over Kansas. First of all, if that happens, that would be kind of like a full circle because Coach K won his first title against Kansas back in '91, I believe it was.
Oh,
so that would be a great story. But I think I like the way Duke has been tested. Against Michigan State, against Texas Tech, they couldn't miss late in the game, and that was really able to propel them to win that game. So I'm going Duke over Kansas. And also selfishly, if Duke beats Kansas or whoever they beat, Villanova, to win the national title, I can say as a Virginia Tech fan that Coach K's final loss will have been to
There you
Virginia
go.
Tech. So I'm
I
going
like
with
that.
yeah, I'm going
I
with
like
Coach K.
that. That's pretty
I
good.
did want to ask you, Coach, about Virginia Tech, because I know you're a UVA guy through and through, and of course who's won the national championship in 2019. But I could tell you were very impressed and very happy for Virginia Tech when they won the AC tournament. What impressed you about that run, those 4 wins in 4 days?
I think it's just a really well-constructed roster. And I think that you've got guys that really play their role to an excellent amount. I love teams that shoot the 3 well. And when you talk about Storm Murphy and Hunter Couture and Darius Maddox and those guys, and even Keve can step out and knock one down from time to time, I think that really it really fits well with the way that a guy like Mike Young likes to coach. I was a big fan of Mike Young when he was at Wofford previously. And, obviously he coached Storm and Keve back there too. So, I loved watching his teams play. I loved seeing them make it to the tournament. I think I picked them once or twice to win a game or two back in those days. But Mike Young is a really good coach. One of the other things is, there's a kid that was part of the Nova Cavs program, Chase Ackerman, who's now a manager for them right now. And I think he's trying to move down the coaching track. I think he's a sophomore over there. And so I actually saw him down there on the floor during the ACC championship game celebrating with the guys. That was really cool. But for me, what it came down to with Virginia Tech was those 2 bigs, Mutz and Keve. And of course, Keve, is sort of the Swiss Army knife, the multi-skilled guy who can take you one-on-one off the dribbles, good passer, good playmaker, and a good defender. But Justin Mutz was the guy that I really fell in love with during the course of the ACC tournament, because he just made winning plays over and over and over again. He could defend all 5 positions on the floor, made the right passes, found ways to get and ones and stick backs all over the place. Tremendous communicator. And you could see, when you coach for as long as I have, you can see the way that the players communicate with each other on the floor and who the guys are, who are the leaders, and who the guys are that inspire confidence in their teammates. And Mutz really showed out in that way, I think, consistently throughout the entire tournament. I would have been happy if he had been the player of the tournament. And I think he was just a tremendously key cog in that whole operation for them. He sets great screens. He makes great plays consistently. And so I was just, that's the player I really fell in love with. And so, watching them from start to finish in that tournament, obviously I was hoping my UVA boys would find a way to pull it out, but wasn't in the cards this year. Not enough shooting. I don't know if you saw that first half against Carolina, but oh my Lord, I think they scored 13 points. That was the ugliest offensive half of basketball that I think I've ever seen. And I've coached high school basketball for a long time. So, that was no bueno, to say the least. So, but good for Virginia Tech, good for them. I went to Tech for a year and had a blast there. So, felt good to see them raise a banner.
For sure. And, based on their seeding, they were an 11 seed. If they hadn't beaten Duke, they probably would not have made the tournament. So that's crazy in and of itself. So I'm going with Duke over Kansas.
So disrespected this year, I thought. I know I put that on Twitter a million times, but the fact that the second place team in the tournament was North Carolina at an 8 seed, like, give me a break. Notre Dame had a great run. Miami obviously had a great run. They just got beat in the Elite 8. I thought that was garbage, the way that the ACC teams were seeded.
I agree. And similar to the Pac-12 last year, I mean, people thought a lot of Pac-12 shouldn't have had a lot of teams, and they ended up making a deep run. Several of their teams you see it with the ACC this year. So I'm going with Duke over Kansas to win it all. And Coach, correct me if I'm wrong, Kansas over Duke?
Yeah, I think that's where I am right now. Obviously, I'm not sure that's who I'm rooting for in either of the 2 games, but I do think that's the most likely outcome.
All right, so we'll see what happens. It's supposed to be an exciting Final Four, and we'll see if Coach K can pull it off in his final run in the NCAA tournament. But, Coach, I want to turn the page and go over to one of your other favorite teams, and that's the Baltimore Orioles. First of all, we're so excited. The season, as of this recording, is a week away. Glad that we have a season and that there will be 162 games. It's not cut short. But what are your thoughts on the Orioles this season? Of course, they've been rebuilding the last few years, and I'm not going to lie, as a Nationals fan, the Nationals will be rebuilding this year as well. But what are your thoughts on the Orioles, on kind of how their offseason has gone, and what are your expectations for the season?
Well, I would say the offseason has been probably a lot less interesting than it could have been, just because of all the transaction freezes that happened with the lockout. I think that's a major piece of it. But at the same time, this is an organization that has been building for a number of years with an eye towards, this year and next year starting to be those times when they start to turn the corner. I could get really nerdy right now and talk about some of those high-end prospects who are, right at the brink of sort of catching, that opportunity to get into the major league lineup and the rotation. And I think that that's going to start happening soon. But one of the biggest things you're going to notice about the Orioles this year is that from the start of the season to the end of the season, you're going to see an enormous amount of roster turnover. I mean, it's going to be huge in terms of you could have a starting lineup at the beginning of the year, and there might be 2 or 3 guys who are still in the starting lineup of 9 guys by the time we get to the end. The starting rotation is going to be 5 guys, and there might be, again, maybe 2, maybe even just 1 of those guys who are in the rotation at the end of this upcoming season. So I think that for Orioles fans like myself who have gone through this really, really tough time for the last few years, it's really an opportunity to see the fruits of the labors of my guy, Mike Elias, TJ grad 2001. So he was here for 2 years with me and 2 years ahead of me. I'm sad that we never crossed paths really, but I'm obviously rooting for him to have a lot of success. He's the GM over there. And I think this is going to be the season where the team goes from being bad to being bad, but fun to watch. So, I'm hoping for 65, 70 wins maybe this year, which would be a huge improvement over the 50 to 55 that we've had the last few years. But you've seen how the process has worked in Houston and Chicago in previous years. I know it's something that a lot of people don't like to have to witness. But from my end, because of the guy who's running the ship and because of the investments that they've made in terms of player development, in terms of analytics, in terms of really getting to not just catching up to the rest of the world, but also, getting out ahead of in some areas where the rest of the league is going to. I think it's going to be exciting to see.
And so, Coach, what are some young players that we have to look out for on the Orioles? If you had to pick maybe a pitcher or even a guy in the lineup, a position player, who are some key young players you think that we should watch out for with the Orioles?
Sure. Well, like I said, I could go about 30 deep if I had to, because I'm a huge nerd about the minor leagues. But the most obvious one is a guy who's been either the number 1 or number 2 prospect in all of baseball, based on who you ask, whether Fangraphs or MLB Pipeline or whoever, and that's Adaley Rutschman. Adaley Rutschman is going to be a switch hitting catcher. He's supposed to be, an elite level defender, communicator, but also, has a contact stick, a power stick, great arm behind the plate. And, supposed to have a reputation for really being strong with working with pitchers. He has sort of the unique attribute that people noticed coming up in the minors and back when he was at Oregon State winning a national title. But he actually goes out to greet the pitcher on their way off of the field at the end of each inning, which, to me as a coach kind of seems obvious, but apparently it's a thing that a lot of people don't do as catchers. So, he's gotten great reviews throughout the organization in terms of the way he works with the pitching staffs and, the way he calls a game, his framing, which, I'm sure is a really important increasing part of catcher defense analytics. And so, I'm really hoping to see great things from him. I think if there weren't the sort of service time manipulation rules that we have had in baseball for a long time, which I know was a major part of the lockout, I don't think it really got resolved that well. But if that didn't exist, you would expect him to be the opening day catcher. He's out with a tricep strain, I think, for a couple of weeks from now, so he wasn't going to make the opening day start anyway. But you should see him in the major leagues probably by May, late May, like Memorial Day at the absolute latest, assuming that the injury profile goes well. But he's going to be a really, really exciting guy to watch. Like I said, switch hitter, can hit it out to all fields, should be really, really enjoyable to watch. And then on the bump, another guy that you want to look at is Grayson Rodriguez, and he's supposed to be the top rated pitching prospect. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him because of the transition. In 2020, there wasn't a minor league season. He was at the alternate site that the Orioles had. And, there was a lot of work that was done there, but obviously he didn't have quite the innings buildup that you would want for a serious prospect. So last year in the minors, he made every regular start every 5 days, but they had him on a limit to where he would pitch no more than 5 innings in any given start. And so it's going to be interesting to see. He'll start the year at AAA, I think, most likely. And then whether or not they sort of take the leash off and let him go 6 or 7 before he comes up to the major leagues, we'll see. But the guy's supposed to have an elite fastball, touches 100 miles an hour, a wipeout curveball, a changeup that's really filthy. So, I mean, you just keep hearing these accolades about a guy like this. And as a fan, you get more and more and more excited. And so I'm hoping to see him relatively soon. I mean, starting pitching has been a huge problem for the Orioles even during the good years that they had in the middle of the 2010s and, to a lesser extent back in the 90s when they had those good years with Davey Johnson, starting pitching's never really been something that we felt great about in the Orioles organization. And so I'm hoping to see that with Rodriguez coming up. There's another guy who's sort of right behind him in the pecking order, is a lefty named D.L. Hall. And he's a guy who got an inning against Philadelphia in a major league spring training game the other day. And he was coming out throwing 100 and having a knee buckling slider, struck out the first two guys. They looked silly. So, you look at stuff like that and you kind of go, okay, maybe there's something to dream on, but there's so much depth in the system at this point. I've been spending more time the last couple of years. I'm one of those nerds who has an MILB.TV subscription. So I'm like watching the Bowie Bay Sox, I'm watching the Norfolk games, I'm watching the Delmarva Shorebirds and all that stuff. And, the way they've gone about player acquisition in the last few years through the draft and through the international signings, it's just made a big difference in terms of the overall depth and health of the organization. And so, this year, I'm hoping to see them turn the corner a little bit. And maybe in 2023, you start thinking about taking on some of those beasts in the AL East.
That's awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, you and your wife are Sunday home game season ticket holders. Are you going to be renewing your tickets this year? And how many games do you make it out for a season?
So we've been doing that for the last, I guess we started in 2018, which was a tough year to start doing it. That was the 45 win season. So, I don't know if we're a curse or whatever, but that was pretty brutal. We went to opening day that year and it started off with an Adam Jones walk-off home run to win the opening day game. And we're like, oh, this is going to be a great season. It's going to be so much fun. And, but no, that was gross. So, but anyway, yeah, we'll do that again this year. It's just going to all the Sunday home games. Parking is easy. And it's, to my mind, it's one of the best stadiums in baseball. So it's been really enjoyable the last few years, and we're looking forward to going and doing that again.
Who's your World Series prediction right now? If you had to pick a week before the season starts, who are your two teams in the World Series, and who do you think ends up winning it all?
Oh boy. So I guess you could go, I think the AL is probably a little bit more challenging this year to pick, because I think there's, for years you could sort of pencil in Houston and you could pencil in maybe Cleveland out of the Central or whatever. And obviously the Yankees and Red Sox are going to be a big deal. I feel like if you pick against the Rays at this point, you're sort of making a mistake, just because, somehow, they never have a group of guys that you really expect. They never have a really high end, payroll or anything like that, but they always seem to win 95 games and end up in the playoffs. So I guess I'll take the Rays just because, not because I have any good reason for it, but just because I think they're smarter than everybody else. And then I think out of the National League, I've been a fan of the Padres ever since Manny Machado went over there. And so I would love to see them do well, but I think it's really hard to pick against the Dodgers. Obviously the Braves are great, but I think that, losing Freddie Freeman, obviously Matt Olson's a great player, but I think that, Freddie was a big deal for them. I just don't know if Atlanta's pitching is going to hold up. But you look at what LA brings to the table, and I think that's going to be too much for a lot of people. I think they're going to win a lot of 10-5 games early on in the season. It's going to beat the heck out of the baseball. And, you see the lineup that they can put up from top to bottom with Mookie and Freddie Freeman and Trey Turner. And I mean, it just keeps coming at you. There's no breaks in that lineup. And now they're going to have a DH. So, they're not even going to be able to throw at the pitcher there. So I'll go Tampa and LA just for the hell of it. And I'm sure to be wrong.
I'm going with the White Sox in the American League. I really like their young core with Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu. And you saw Tony La Russa last year able to show he can still manage in the big leagues even after taking a break. Lucas Giolito is a guy I've really enjoyed watching since he got traded from the Nationals. And then I'm going to go with a team that, their manager very well, and that's the New York Mets. I mean, you got the 1-2 duo with Max Scherzer, well, really Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. You've got Francisco Lindor leading that lineup. Even as a Nats fan, I hate to say it, but I'm always indebted to Max Scherzer for that World Series. So I'm going to say the Mets, and I'm a big fan of Buck Showalter. I'm going to have Mets and White Sox in my World Series. But I guess I wanted to go with that question next is, as an Orioles fan, who, of course, Buck Showalter was your manager for 8 years, are you rooting for him to do well in New York?
I think so. I think that, Buck Buck was obviously, it's no secret. Things changed in Baltimore when he came on at the end of the 2011 season. You had that magical Robert Andino moment that everybody remembers that ended the Red Sox season that year. And then he comes back in 2012 and they make a serious run. And all of a sudden, sort of the whole tone of the organization has changed completely. Nobody expected them to be in the wild card that year. They go out and they win the wild card game and get themselves into a series with the Yankees. He's just a guy who you listen to him talk and he inspires confidence in terms of the way he talks about the players and the way he talks about the standards that they're going to be held to. And I think early on in his tenure, that's going to be a really positive thing. And he's going to have the benefit of a really talented group in New York. Obviously, I think that Pete Alonso obviously is going to be a big deal over there. Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo had a great year last year. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun watching them. I am curious to see how the DeGrom and Scherzer thing holds up, just because, those are, Max is going to be 38 this year, I want to say, at some point during the year. And DeGrom missed half the year last year with injuries. It's almost like DeGrom is so good that it's unfair if he gets to pitch a whole season. I almost feel like it's that way with him. I can't imagine what would happen if you have Jacob DeGrom with a full season and also a lineup that can score runs for him. Like, you're talking about a guy who could legitimately win 25 games in a season, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Max, I think if he wanted to, could pitch until he was 45. He's just that dude. I think it's just, toughness and grit and he brings everything to the mound that you want in a starting pitcher. But, I like that pick, and I like the White Sox pick too. I think the AL Central is going to be really interesting this year. You see Minnesota is doing all the reloading that they're doing, trying to make up for what was a really unexpectedly poor season last year. But also, you got the White Sox, Luis Robert, and I don't know if Eloy Jimenez is going to come back, and he's going to be a big stick in the middle of the lineup this year. Nick Madrigal, there's all of those guys. I think it's going to be a really fun team to watch, and I think you're spot on picking them. But I think that division is going to be interesting too. The Tigers are coming off of sort of the back end of their rebuild. I think where they were last year is where I expect the Orioles to be this year. So, this is going to be a year that I think the Tigers have a chance to turn the switch and maybe win some games too, after a long time being really rough. So I'm looking forward to seeing what goes on in that league as well.
I have to ask you one Nationals question. Of course, my expectations for the team this year, I think, they'll be interesting kind of in a similar rebuilding process. It's good they signed Nelson Cruz to a one-year deal to kind of be a mentor figure to Juan Soto. We'll see if Steven Strasburg can stay healthy, as well as kind of how that whole rotation takes shape post not having Max Scherzer there. But I'm curious, do you believe ultimately that the Nationals will re-sign Juan Soto? I mean, he's probably going to demand, $500 million potentially, given, Scott Boras, he likes to make sure his guys gets his money. But then also, look at the Nationals. They haven't been able to re-sign Anthony Rendon, Bryce Harper. Trey Turner was traded away, of course. So they really haven't committed to position guys. More of their big contracts have been given to pitchers like a Max Scherzer, like a Steven Strasburg. If you had to predict, do you think the Nats ultimately re-sign Juan Soto?
I hope so. I really do. And I know that's not, you asked me what I think will happen. I'll go out on a limb and I'll say, yeah, I think they do. Just because, I think that as they sort of get out from under the Patrick Corbin deal and some of that, I think that's going to make things a little bit easier for them. And I think that, I would hope by this point that they have seen what happens when you take a real cornerstone player and you make that person somebody who's going to be sort of a DC lifer, right? I would love to see Juan Soto sort of be the Alex Ovechkin of the Nats franchise in a lot of ways. I think that would be a really, really cool thing to see just for DC and for DC baseball fans. It was tough to watch Bryce Harper get away, but I remember tweeting right after he signed with the Phillies. I said something like, I don't know if you're familiar with the old Bill Simmons Ewing theory. Is that something that you're familiar with? So Bill Simmons, obviously very famous sports writer from Boston, and he had this theory that was built around Patrick Ewing for the Knicks, and that was, he would say, okay, you have this great superstar, and then when that person leaves, then all of a sudden that team is like freed of all the expectations, and they end up being good. And so what I tweeted was, now that Bryce Harper is off the books and he's finally off in Philly, watch the Nats go win a pennant this year. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happened. I'm not usually right when I predict things, but I was like, just watch that's what's going to happen this year. Since I'm not a Nats fan, like, this is what's going to happen. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And they took it all the way to the World Series. So, I I don't know. I think that it felt like the whole sort of Nats organization was able to breathe a little bit when Bryce Harper went away. But I don't see the same thing with Juan Soto. I see him as a guy who contributes really positive to the locker room environment and who is sort of a calming presence and plays the game the right way and is just a reliable stick in the middle of the lineup, and should be for a really, really long time. So I hope that they lay out the money. I hope they make the financial commitment. And I kind of hope that they try to do it sooner rather than later and try to see if they can get that extension done, just so it doesn't end up being like a Miguel Cabrera kind of deal where the guy is, down at the end of his career and you're still paying him $50 million a year for really rough production. I hope they try to see if they can get that done relatively soon, because he certainly seems like a guy who deserves it. But you mentioned Nelson Cruz too, and I think that's an underrated signing for them, especially now that you have the DH available in the National League. I mean, every team who's signed Nelson Cruz since he started having this sort of idea, well, he's an aging slugger, right? Well, the Orioles signed him in 2014 and he hit 40 home runs and, damn near won them the AL pennant that year. So, every team that signs him seems to be better off for it. Tampa and Minnesota and Texas over the years, like everybody ends up better off for signing that dude. So, you hope that he has a great year in terms of production and that he's able to do some of the same things that he's done in previous years. And so I like the things that they're trying to do to not go into that really bad, 50, 60 win kind of neck of the woods. The NL East is obviously going to be really tough. I mean, Miami's got a good young pitching staff now that's going to be a real pain in the butt with Alcantara and Edward Cabrera and Pablo Lopez and all of those guys that are going to be really tough. So I'll be interested to see what happens, but I think that they'll be competitive and I think they'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. Interesting to watch. And, my number one priority is over the next couple of years, just make sure you re-sign Juan Soto and hopefully sooner rather than later. Coach, you've been so gracious with your time. I wanted to transition now to a couple of fun questions to close out the podcast. This is actually the number one question I wanted to ask you coming into this podcast. I want to talk to you about the handshake lines. You obviously know this as a high school coach. And obviously we saw this incident with Juwan Howard and Greg Gard. Juwan Howard threw a punch an assistant coach, and that kind of ignited this discussion about, we really should do away with, handshake lines, especially in the heat of a, exciting game at the end. It's kind of hard for some of these guys to maybe hold themselves in and not kind of do something that they'll regret. Tom Izzo came out passionately against that. And I think most people agree, high school, obviously, that, we should have the handshake lines. But what do you think about this discussion about, whether or not you should continue in college? I mean, you obviously as a high school coach, you've been in some exciting games and some have gone your way, some haven't gone your way. And at the end of the game, you've had to, shake the other team's coach and the other team's players. What's your thoughts on all this? Should we keep the handshake line? And, what's kind of the ramification of the Juwan Howard situation?
It's funny because when we had to go through what we did with COVID last year, especially, we were trying to minimize contact. Everybody was in masks and we were still playing the ball games, but that was one of the things that sort of went away temporarily was the handshake line. Because, I guess the optics of having the two teams slap hands after the game, I guess that wasn't something that most people wanted to do. And it sort of came back this past season here and there. I know there were a lot of games where we didn't do it sort of in the middle of the season because there was an Omicron surge and we were I kept my guys in masks, I think, longer than most people did this year, not because of any, I don't know, not trying to make a statement or anything, but just, we felt like it was the right thing to do. It made sense for us and our program to make sure that we're trying to take care of ourselves the best we could. But with respect to the handshake line, I am it hasn't been the case in the, in the NBA for a long time. Obviously that hasn't been a thing, for forever, but it's not just a thing in basketball. It's a thing in all sports. It's a thing in high school and college football. It's a thing in, in every sport. It's even a thing in the NHL when you get to the end of a playoff series and everybody does the handshake line. And obviously that's one of the most emotional moments that you can possibly have in a sport where fighting is literally legal, right? So that they have the handshake line at the end of the tough playoff series. To me, I think it's important because it really brings us back to what's actually important in terms of what we're doing from an interscholastic sports perspective, which is what college really is, right? I mean, you talk about college being more and more monetized and professionalized as the years have gone by, but in the end, these are still college kids representing their school playing against each other. And for me, that means something. So I like the idea that after the game, no matter what happens, we step back, we take a moment to acknowledge the team that we've played against, and we engage in a little bit of sportsmanship, just to sort of set the example for everybody else in the building that, okay, the game's over, but we're, maybe not over it, but we're able to get ourselves to a place where we can cross by each other and show mutual respect and so on. I don't know that I feel super passionate about that in the way that maybe Tom Izzo does. And, I know a lot of people want to be like hot take Harry here and just say something explosive. But to me, like, I think it's important. I think it's a really good thing. And I think that it's a way of trying to settle down some of those emotions and get ourselves sort of centered a little bit. And okay, well, now we've got to go. We've got to shake the other team's hands. We've got to say good game, even if it's perfunctory. And I know for a lot of kids it is. And they just kind of, good game, good game, good game. Some of them will, even pull their hands back if they're going to be immature or whatever. But I don't know. To me, I think it sets a good tone. And I think it's an acknowledgement that this is just a game and that, we're not mortal enemies. We're just two teams that are playing each other, representing our schools. So I hope it doesn't go away. Just because I think that it's visually important, and I think that it matters in terms of the tone of the overall contest. I guess that's my perspective on it.
I'm curious with a guy like Coach Lynn, who is the Marshall head coach, and of course he's, one of your close friends. I believe he was a groomsman at your wedding. Is it easier or harder to shake his hand after a game? Because you guys have had a lot of great battles over the years.
It's harder to play them, but it's easier to shake his hand because we're really good friends. And he and I both feel the same way about this. We're going to go play in their tip-off tournament again this upcoming year, like we did last year, which was a nice way to hang out with them and spend some time and be in the same environment, watch each other's teams play, and be able to go to Denny's afterwards and talk about it over a waffle or something, right? But it's I just have never been a guy who likes playing against his friends. That's not me. I have a lot of guys who I have a lot of respect for in this area, a lot of coaches who, have become my friends either through AAU ball or whatever. And no, I don't get any special satisfaction out of beating my friends, or I don't feel any worse when I lose to my friends. If anything, I feel worse when we beat them. We had a game against Marshall, not this past year, but the year before, where one of my kids came out and hit 6 threes, and one of them was a buzzer beater to end the game. And after the game, I just I felt great for my kids, but I felt terrible for Jerry because Jerry's a good guy, he's a good coach. And I know he took that loss especially hard because of, who their program is at Marshall and who our program is at Jefferson. So, to me, I would just as soon not play against my friends and just be in the stands and root for them. And that's why I like playing in that tip-off tournament, because then he invites Mike Barbie from Fairfax over. And so I get to watch his team play, and then we get to hang out afterwards and so on. So I would just as soon not play against my friends. But if I do, it's nice that that's the hand I'm shaking at the end of the line.
I'm curious because I've always wanted to ask you about this game, and I don't think I've ever had a chance to. I want to go back to 2013. TJ and Madison at Madison. I believe the sequence of the game was Joe Nissen a dunk to tie the game, and then Mig Gabriel game winner at the buzzer. What do you remember about that game? And man, that's got to stand out. I think I've seen the YouTube video of that. It's gotten over 1,000 views.
Yeah, that was that was one of the fondest memories, no doubt about it. So Madison was coached by a guy back then by the name of Chris Kublank, who actually has connections with our staff. My assistant, Mark Travis, coached Kublank as a JV player, I think either JV or a freshman player, when they were over at Lee High School, the artist formerly known as Lee. And so, they had a relationship with each other. I had coached against Kublank for a number of years. That was a Friday night game over at Marshall. It was a packed house for both schools, like their entire, they got that 6-man section over there that I'm sure you've seen that was packed to the gills. And then, over on our side, we probably had a good 50, 60, 70 kids from TJ that had traveled to go see that game as well. And that was a team that I really liked a lot. That was my 3rd year as the head coach of the organization. And 3 of those guys who were seniors that year were kids that I had coached as freshmen on the freshman team. And so I had those guys for a long time. It really meant a lot to me that they were in a game like that, in an environment like that. The specifics of the game, I will be honest, I don't remember a ton in terms of the back and forth. But I do remember that, the call that I made at the end with that last possession was to give Mig the ball and let him try to break the guy down off the dribble. And I said, if you see a pass, make the pass. If you see a shot, take the shot. And, he took it crossover, one dribble back to his right, a little step back from the elbow and buried it. And that was really satisfying. I think you probably, the Madison crowd prides themselves on their, shall we say, spirit and intensity, and any number of other really, really kind words that I can use here. They take a lot of pride in the way that they cheer for their kids. But sometimes you win a road game and it feels nice to send the other folks home. And that was one of those nights, I will tell you. I really had a good time with that. As a matter of fact, if you can find that YouTube clip, you should overlay it here on top of the podcast here. I'll give it to you if you need it.
For sure. And my final question for you, Coach, you've been so gracious with your time is, and I want to go back to our two schools, Virginia Tech and UVA. What do you think the two schools have to do to really become a national rivalry? I mean, I think part of it is you look at football, UVA has to pull its weight, and men's basketball, it's actually, I think, becoming pretty competitive. You got two great coaches and two great men in Mike Young and Tony Bennett leading these programs. So what do you think UVA, Virginia Tech has to do to become on par with some of the great rivalries like Ohio State, Michigan, like a Duke, North Carolina?
You got to win titles. That's it. I think that for Virginia Tech, winning the ACC championship raised the profile of not just that school, not just that program, but also that rivalry. Because now, UVA has a national title. Virginia Tech has an ACC championship, their first one. And so that looks like it's, kind of on that level. Virginia Tech football. So what it seems like when Virginia Tech football is really good, UVA is nowhere near where they are. And the consequence of that is, that the games between them are not terribly interesting. You get the 52-14s and the stuff like that. And UVA just, you've had some good years. I mean, Brennan Armstrong was a great guy this year. And Bryce Perkins obviously had a couple good years. The one game that he managed to beat Tech was awesome. But, for UVA, I think it would be really meaningful to beat Tech when they're really good. Like that would be the big difference. And that's just not something that's happened. UVA, I think they went to the ACC championship game a couple of years ago. I want to say that was 2019. And that year they went out and played Clemson, and that was a little ugly. So, it really is just about, you want to be that national level rivalry. Yankees Red Sox is Yankees Red Sox because those two teams are really good. Duke and Carolina is Duke and Carolina because those programs are both really, really good. I don't think there's any less intensity in terms of the rivalry. It's just that the teams just haven't been as competitive. They've been competitive, but not on that sort of national level. And when that happens, that's when I think you'll get to that point where everybody else is starting to pick sides like they do for Duke and Carolina or Yankees Red Sox.
Coach, this has been such a great time getting to chat with you about all the great things you're doing and to talk about the NCAA tournament and the Orioles and Virginia and so much more. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been so awesome to catch up.
Billy, it's always a pleasure, man. Really enjoy our conversations and looking forward to texting back and forth during the Final Four, man.
For sure. Thanks so much to Coach Mark Gray-Mendes, Thomas Jefferson High School basketball coach, for joining me on the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm Billy Parvatam, folks. Have a great time, and we'll see you next time.